Okay, I'm Mutton on Play Chess, and hopefully some more will come to Play Chess. And this has also been streamed as well on Twitch. Good evening, all. Okay, I thought this week we could have a look at some games in the Smith-Morra gambit. So this is a very exciting gambit against the Sicilian Defence. So let's have a look at an example model game. So this was Marc Esserman against Lock van Wheelie, played in the 112th US Open. So Marc Esserman playing white. So this is in 2011. Marc Esserman kicked off with e4, and we saw the Sicilian Defence played by Lock van Wheelie. And now we have d4. So this is the signal for the Smith-Morra gambit. Quite a dangerous gambit indeed. So it's actually accepted. Then Marc played c3. D takes c3. It was accepted. Knight takes c3. So white has established a lead in development. This knight taking that. There's also, you see that c file is shared here, but white also has the d file pressure. So there's a bit of a difference from the normal Sicilian defence. With the c pawn missing, that gives some advantages to white tactically in the short term. In the end game, of course, it's an extra pawn for the opponent, but that's a long way off to get to the end game. So we see knight c6. Marc Esserman, by the way, before continuing this game, he's written an excellent book on the Morra Smith, Mayhem in the Morra, which I actually have, very entertainingly written. So, okay, knight c6 looks solid enough. Knight f3, and black's plan now looks extremely solid, anticipating that this bishop's going to be dangerous, pointing at f7. Black plays e6. So the bishop goes to c4 anyway, even though it's biting granite, it seems. So how can white actually break through and make use of this gambit? Let's see, a6. Black takes time for a6 to secure that b5 square, because often knight b5 could be annoying, especially, for example, if the queen wanted to come to c7, then without any harassment with knight b5. So a6 fits in, even though black hasn't developed many pieces yet. We have 3 pieces developed for whites and just 1 for black at the moment. Okay, now white is actually able to castle, and now we see a rather unusual looking move, but it fits the position. Knight ge7. If the more standard knight f6, then that gives white a couple of dangerous options. Bishop g5, and also just maybe e5 is tempting here. At minimum, this could establish a bind on d6. For example, knight g4, bishop f4 might be useful for a bind on d6. That could be exploited later. So it looks as though knight ge7 sidesteps all of this stuff. But bishop g5 is played anyway. So the idea is to try and provoke some weaknesses from black and encourage black to play f6. And it does weaken slightly this diagonal with that pawn moved there. Pawns cannot go backwards. So a weakness has been created. The bishop drops back to e3 now. So it's eyeing b6. This is another point that the Morra is not just about the king. Sometimes this just raw lead and development can use squares which could embarrass the queen as well, potentially, if the bishop was protected and went to b6 later. That could be dangerous. Knight g6 is played. Bishop b3. Bishop drops back for a moment. Ahead of a knight e5, that will be attacking the bishop. But black is not interested in playing knight e5. b5 is played. And it looks as though, with bishop b7 and a knight e5, is black's position that unpleasant at all? Well, now we have a surprising move in this position to try and get at the black king before it can castle later. A very surprising but kind of thematic move in the Smith-Morra gambit. I wonder if you can spot what white played here if I give you 20 seconds starting from now. What would you play as white? Any ideas? Okay, I'm going to have to show you. It's a change in pawn structure again here is inflicted actually on black, otherwise it looks as though b6 is going to be a problem. So it's a forcible change of pawn structure. If I give you that as a clue, white actually played knight d5, and this is now, if it's left there, bishop b6 is remarkably dangerous, attacking the queen. In fact, checkmating the queen. Kind of, the queen would have no squares. So this is taken, and we have a change in pawn structure. E takes d. We have a road created along the e file to the black king, but it was at the cost of a piece. Knight c e5. And what of this bishop blocked in by its own pawn now? Well, white does something about that. d6. And it looks as though queen d5 now is potentially dangerous, attacking the rook, and f7. But e5 is holding up f7 for a moment. And in fact, d5 is taken away from white anyway with this next move, which is bishop b7. So what has white got here to justify the knight sacrifice? Well, knight takes e5 is played now. And this is very interesting because can black not just take with the knight? In the game, black took with the f pawn. If black took with the knight, is it clear white's attack here, how white could proceed? White has initiative, but I think with the black king sort of stranded at the moment, black really wanted to get rid of this d6 pawn. I think that might help explain why actually black wanted, in fact, this f6 square to attack this pawn to try and get rid of it. So actually f takes e, giving, you know, f6 for the queen was played instead. Now with queen f6 on the cards and the d pawn about to drop, white's to do something quite quickly, and the energetic move using the rook on f1 by default is played f4, just expanding the scope of the rook. And now black played queen f6. Surely he's just going to get the d6 pawn and then it'll be okay. Well, we see f takes e played, which opens up the f file now. Queen takes e5, but now look, e3 and d6 are hanging. So isn't this pretty bad? For example, as white, if we played queen d2, black also controls the critical f4 square here with the knight. So bishop takes d6 is actually threatening h2. So okay, this is unpleasant. So actually there's, in this position, a rather stunning idea occurs in this position. Really quite stunning. It looks as though, though, in this position there's already a dangerous looking check, but maybe the king just sidesteps. So there's a dangerous looking check to factor in. If the king sidestepped to d8 though, it might be quite safe on d8, and black's going to collect that d pawn. So a clever move is needed here. A super clever move is actually played, it seems. I wonder if you can spot it. So white play, what would you play in this position if I can get rid of these arrows and stuff? So white to play in this position, if I gave you 20 seconds here, what would you play with white? Anyone? Okay, I'm going to show you. It's a remarkable move is played in this position. It was actually bishop g5, preventing the king from going to d8. So now this bishop f7 check is a lot more effective. But isn't there a slight snag with this bishop g5? You might wonder. Isn't the bishop just en prise here to the queen? That is a good observation to make. The queen, if the queen takes though, there's a nasty shocker in this position. Let's have a look. It threatens actually mate, so it seems quite quick that as well as taking bishop, threatening mate doesn't seem all bad. But actually in this position, the remarkable resource white has is not queen e2 check, because king d8 and then there's nothing. If we look at queen e2, king d8, nothing, no big deal. But a little sidestepping move instead, queen e1 makes a huge difference here. Now, if king d8 in this position, then we have actually queen a5, rather sneaky, using those dark squares over there. And this is pretty bad news for black. If here, then we just mate. If the king goes back, then that's bad news. King stranded in the center. Bishop f7 actually is mate. So that's pretty bad news. This queen e1 is a fantastic resource. And in fact, that leaves us with bishop e7 to inspect. If bishop e7 check here is still pretty lethal. If over here we get mated as before on c7. And if the king goes in front of the firing line, then bishop takes g6. Okay, the king moves here. Sorry, the queen moves rather. If say here, then we've got queen e7 check using the pin on the bishop, and then we're just mating here. So this is pretty diabolical. And okay, so that's pretty nasty stuff arising from bishop g5, remarkably. So bishop g5 seems to be a fantastic resource. So black played actually bishop e7 here, shielding against that, so for the king to be able to go to d8. And now the game continues with bishop f7, king d8, d takes e7, knight takes e7. And now the bishop is protected with queen d2, but also of course the queen looks at a5 again. Here, king c8, check, knight c6, rook f d1, attacking d7 now. Queen goes to protect. And now bishop f4 now threatens queen d6 to mate on c7. Offering the bishop here for that opportunity. That's taken. Queen d6. The king tries to wriggle with king d8. And now, okay, white is material down for a moment, to piece down, but now plays rook takes c6. So this is pretty nasty stuff. That's taken. And now queen takes c6, attacking the rook. And here, it's pretty bad for black. So bad that black actually resigned in this position. It is quite horrendous. If the rook, say, moves like this awkwardly, well, we can just, I think bishop g5 is one of the most crushing. You know, we can just play queen here. Mate, that's pretty nasty. There's not too much defense here going on in this position. If rook c8, bishop g5 again, and we just take here again, it doesn't look as though it's defensible. What a crushing game. And Marc Esserman himself mentioned for me to go over this game just actually last night. I had this marathon bullet match with Marc Esserman himself, funny enough, at 5 in the morning. And he mentioned this game against Lot Van Willy, and actually Van Welly, pardon me. And I thought I'd go over it today, as well as some other Smith-Morra games. So it's one of his more notable games, and featured in detail in Mayhem in the Morra. So let's have a look at another of his games. And this was actually played at the very prestigious, apparently it was played in the very prestigious Harvard University, this next game, in 2008, the Harvard Open. So they actually have chess tournaments. I didn't know that. I was a great fan of The Paper Chase, and that was set at Harvard University. It was both a series and a film. And to see a game, played at Harvard University is very interesting, actually. So this was against Vadim Marcherosa. So let's have a look. Marc Esserman playing white. He was now again Sicilian. Again, he uses the Smith-Morra gambit. C takes C3, and black takes. Knight takes C3, and again this construction with E6. So it's very popular to blunt this bishop on C4. A very popular system against the Smith-Morra. Okay, accepting the gambit, that is. So knight f3, a6, bishop c4. Here black now plays d6. White castles. b5, the bishop drops back. And black sneakily plays rook a7. So this rook is helping with defensive duties around key squares. e3, rook d7. If rook c7, that's embarrassing. Of course, because of that dreaded b6 square skewing. So the idea here is rook d7. Now white plays knight d4, and this unravels a plan to kind of put more pressure on e6 and this f file. Try and peel up the f file and put pressure on e6. So knight f6, f4, bishop b7, f5. Not worried about a pawn in the center here. Okay, now black plays e5, and here if the knight goes back, then maybe black is in good shape. Possibly just bishop e7 and castling. It might be too dangerous to take on e4 without checking this. At minimum, white's can have f6s and stuff in some lines if knight takes e4. So. But this would still be black seems to be okay. There might even be an immediate d5 idea potentially, just making use of the rook for d5, possibly. So in this position, something good is needed before black can unravel. I wonder if you can spot what white played in this position. If I give you 20 seconds starting from now. So white to play, and you want to stop black unraveling. What would you play as white? Anyone? Okay. One of you has spotted that fantastic resource that I was alluding to. So congrats to Mokoset. Knight e6. Again, it's like inflicting a change of pawn structure actually. This f-file would be nice to have a rook down it. So f takes, and we've got a dangerous pawn on e6. Okay, so the rook moves to c7 actually, allowing this dreaded skewer. Now if it moved to e7, I think there's even worse for black. In rook takes f6, knocking out the h for the h5 square is diabolical here. That's very, very embarrassing indeed. So rook c7 is a lesser evil move, allowing bishop b6 skewer. But white is interested in the king, not in material. So bishop e7, not taking immediately, but now playing rook c1. Black castles here. Is the worst over? What's happened here? Well, there's a penalty here. This bishop on this diagonal with this pawn is quite dangerous. Bishop takes c7, queen takes. Now knight d5 attacks the queen and stops it going to b6. The queen drops back, and Oh, this is a wonderful conception that's played out now. An absolutely wonderful idea. I'll get you closer to it. Knight takes e7 was played. Queen takes. And can you spot what white played in this position? If I give you 20 seconds starting from now, white play a very nice attacking move indeed. So white's play. If you're on the notation tab, please turn it off for these quizzes. Okay, the queen is blocking the pawn, and so it's deflected away with rook c7. So queen takes, not much else. e7 check. And now if rook f7, then I think this is not good because of rook takes f6, for example, threatening next e8. So that would be pretty nasty. So g takes e8 queen is unpleasant. So basically black tries d5 to stop this check. And now we see bishop takes d5 check. If black plays knight takes d5, then that's end of game with either e takes or rook takes his mate. So bishop takes d5 is played. And again, queen takes d5 now, because this is very powerful, this idea. Then if knight takes, again, we've got e takes, mating, or rook takes. So the now after queen takes, the rook goes in front. And now we have queen d8 check, which is embarrassing. Queen takes, and white queens, end of game. White's up in material. Black didn't want to play on, of course, here. So that was a bit of a crushing game with the Smith-Morra as well. So it's starting to look like a viable weapon of choice, a surprise weapon against the Sicilian Defence, which is one of the most popular responses to 1e4. So it's a great weapon, maybe, to try out in our games. Let's have a look at another example from Marc Esserman. This time played in Miami, in the Miami Open of 2008 in September. Okay, against Justin Sarka, not Justin Bieber, Justin Sarka. So let's have a look. So again, e4, and Justin plays c5, pardon me. So we have the Morra Smith repeats the normal move order to get there. e6 again, knight f3, a6. After bishop c4, now black plays an immediate b5 here, bit of variety for white. Bishop b3, bishop b7. Okay, white castles. And now b4, as though blacks might not be just keen in the pawn, might just be about central control. If the knight moved back, black could just be carrying on with central control like this. Maybe this sort of position would be very comforting to have, you know, blunting the bishop and ready to castle. But no, white's not having any of that. What does white play here? So as a seasoned Smith-Morra player, what would you play in this position if I gave you 20 seconds starting from now? Anyone? Okay. Yes, the thematic knight d5 again. So we're inflicting that change of pawn structure to get that e-file very, very quickly. That's the idea. You sacrifice a knight and you get that very nice pawn structure. Okay, so e takes d5 is played. E takes d5. And it looks as though this is ridiculous, surely, because this bishop can now actually be blocked with d6. Where's the attack? Is this really sound? Well, queen d4 now looks over g7. So if bishop e7, maybe queen g7. So we see knight f6. It was also attacking b4, though. White takes on b4. Attacking the bishop. Queen c7. And now we see bishop f4. And this looks dangerous. Hold on a sec. This c-file. Okay, so knight bd7, maybe to answer rook c1 with knight c5. But now check. And oh dear, this is bad news, this check. Because actually the queen on b4 hasn't just snapped up a pawn, it's on d6. If bishop e7, we have bishop takes d6 in this position. Pretty nasty stuff on e7 all of a sudden. So given that, after this check, black actually played king d8. And now we have rook ac1. And after queen b6, white play. It's actually the final move of the game. White has control of the c and e files here. The king has no escape squares. These critical escape routes, if this is were useful to have some escape routes, they're all gone here. So what would you play as white to exploit this fact? If I give you 20 seconds starting from now, do you move your queen or do you do something else? So white to play, what would you play here? I'll remove these arrows while you're thinking. Okay, knight g5 is pretty lethal, threatens this mate. The problem is the stuffing can defend it. If knight e5 we drop our queen, you know, if we take it, it's just mate. It's mate. It's embarrassing. Knight g5 is embarrassing. The king is in an embarrassing spot on d8, just cut off, as the arrows before showed. So knight f7 is actually pretty lethal. The knight can't even help here because the queen's hanging. Wow. Okay, so let's have a look at some other games now, not of Esserman, but some other players, which I found. So even in the realms of correspondence chess, in the ICCF email section of a correspondence game in 2002, the Smith-Morra was made use of. Now, if it can be made use of a gambit, which normally would consider gambits as being unsound, and correspondence style chess more of a science, how did this go? So this was in a match, I think, Hong Kong against Iceland. Playing white was Arnie Christensen and black was Michael Spooner. So e4 from Arnie Christensen. So we have c5. Now each of these moves might have been, you know, after days or maybe even weeks, depending on the time control of the correspondence game. So Morra-Smith gambit, Smith-Morra. I keep saying Morra-Smith gambit rather than Smith-Morra. Pardon me. Force of habit. So d takes, knight takes, e6, knight f3, a6. So as a correspondence player, this guy's done heavy research and discovered this should be effective in his opinion. From his research, bishop c4, knight c6. After castles, And now d6. Again, a slight difference from before. This daring to play this kind of Scheveningen formation, tempo's down from the normal Scheveningen. Bishop e7, rook d1. It looks as though e5 could be a problem with this pressure on the d file. Queen c7, putting the brakes on e5. So the whole setup looks to make perfectly logical sense that black has deprived the use of the b5 square, is putting the brakes on e5. So what has white got exactly? Well, bishop f4 puts more pressure on d6 and might threaten e5 in the future. And e5 is you don't want to play e5 for knight d5. So this is okay. Unpleasant pressure. Knight f6, rook ac1. And it looks bad to have a rook against the queen here, but black is not too worried. It castles. Bishop b3. And now there might be a slight concern about knight d5 in this position. Trying to get an advantage positionally might be a concern. The queen sidesteps to b8. And it looks fairly tempting as though e5, but then maybe something like knight h5. I'm not saying I've analysed this, but white actually didn't play e5 immediately, but h3, maybe possibly to drop the bishop back. To play e5, and if knight h5, drop the bishop back. So maybe that was the intent. b5, and in fact the move e5 is played now. D takes, knight takes, and it looks unpleasant that the queen's been harassed in this variation. Knight takes, bishop takes, but it's not just the queen. We're eyeing f6, and maybe h7 if f6 is encouraged. Some compromise with f6. Queen b7. Bishop c2, eyeing h7 now. So we got something eyeing f6, the defender of h7, and h7 itself. Queen a7, a weird move to play. Queen a7, what a crazy move. So what's the idea? Well, white might have been threatening bishop takes and bishop e4 skewing. So it's just sidestepping threats maybe. Knight e4, knight d5. Now bishop b3, trying to win a pawn. Bishop b7. White takes now on d5. After e takes, doesn't move the knight, but infiltrates with the rook. Bishop d8. And now queen g4, threatening mate in 1. With a terrible concession about to be made now. G6. Looks as though these dark squares have had it around the king. Surely, statistically, this is a way to lose with black. Once you start weakening dark squares like this, especially if the opponent's got a dark square bishop. Knight f6 check. Black takes that, bishop takes. And all it needs now is this queen really to make its way somehow to h6. So queen b6, okay, puts pressure on f6 and the rook. Queen f4 defends the rook. And there's a threat here. Spot the threat. You can't play this. That's not the threat because the queen takes f6. If I told you that, what is white actually threatening? If white was to move here, what would you say white's principal threat is? If I gave you 20 seconds starting from now. I know it's black's move, but what is white's threat that black has to deal with? Well, in fact, black resigned, so it's a good discussion time anyway. Black resigned here. Okay, the threat is rook takes b7. I don't. Let's try and give a move though, like rook b8 is sensible. In principle, takes and then queen h6. We're mating, right? So let's give a move rook b8. Now, what would white play here? So we defended b7. What would you play here with white? Now, I haven't checked this with an engine, but I think there's a winning move. Fairly clear cut in the position, running with tempo. I wonder if you'll come up with the same move as me. We have this rook on the 7th now, very dangerous on the 7th. So what would you play here with white? Sorry, I don't mean to distract you with that observation. It's still to do with these dark squares principally. Okay, I believe if the game continued like this, okay, I hope you've got your thoughts together. I'm about to say, okay, some of you have mentioned bishop d4, because I imagine that queen, attacking the queen. If queen e6, I think in this position, queen h6 looks absolutely terminal, threatening mate. And if f6, then the rooks all of a sudden activate. So we slide in, or queen g7. Take your pick. So that was a correspondence game, kind of showing it's dangerous even in correspondence chess, this gambit. Let's have a look now at the New York Masters, the 53rd US New York Masters. I think one of the things which didn't do the Smith-Morra gambit too many favours was the originators after Smith and Morra. I think one of them didn't have too good results, but he was playing against GMs and he didn't do very well with it, and it wasn't kind of thought of as that great. The thing is, this is a classic thing in chess. There's a huge gulf between grandmaster chess and amateur chess because they're rewarding totally different things. Grandmaster chess is one-day chess, a whole day usually. If you don't play solidly, you'll be punished. In our club chess, it's usually an evening, maybe 2 hours when we're tired, usually after work, 3 hours. It's a completely different context. And what is rewarded in one context isn't so much in another. If you play a dangerous gambit in club matches, people are tired, they blunder, they'll have real time pressure. It's much shorter time limits. Things in different contexts have different rewards. Just because grandmasters might not use it in one-day chess, it doesn't mean a thing for amateurs. We shouldn't all be playing the Slav or the Grunfeld just because grandmasters play the Slav and the Grunfeld. The entire reward system is completely different, just based on the time control, let alone exhaustion levels. So if you're faced with a dangerous gambit late at night in a club match, it is dangerous. So let's have a look. Lev Milman against John Elveston. This was played in the New York Masters of about 2000 and something. I wish I could see that. Okay. So Lev Milman, e4. John Elveston plays the Sicilian. d4. C takes. c3. D takes, knight takes, knight c6, knight f3, and again e6. A very popular setup to blunt, the bishop in advance. Bishop c4, queen c7. This is slightly different now. What is black up to? White castles, knight f6. White seems to be provoked because of this omission to attack the queen. Is this good to attack the queen here? A 2600. John Elveston is tempting white, who's 2326, to attack his queen. Is this a bad idea? Well, white does play knight b5. The queen goes to b8. Is it just going to be kicked back? Repulsed? Well, white plays now e5. And it starts to get a bit dangerous, surely, to take here. This is just asking for it. So we see knight g4. And now knight d6 check. Black takes, e takes. Well, at least the dark square bishop, you might think, could be of some use. Now b5. Is black solid? Bishop drops back. Now black castles. Has he got away with it? Is his position solid? h3, knight f6, rook e1, a5, bishop g5. Here's a problem. Where's this knight go? Does it really want to go back? That looks terrible to go back. a4 is played, just allowing the double pawns. Bishop takes f6. Black takes, g takes here. Bishop c2 eyeing h7. Knight b4. Bishop b1. Knight d5. Has black got away with it? Isn't this dangerous, this diagonal, or is it just f5 is in the way? Well, f5 looks as though it would render this harmless here. White didn't even bother with that. White played knight h4, which introduces queen h5, looking at h7. I know it's rather crude stuff, and you might say as though this pawn's now ready to be taken because this knight kind of is interrupting protection of d6. So that's taken. Now, h7, this is such a simple concept. It seems we should all be mastering, surely, as attacking players, how to checkmate on h7. Surely we should know how to checkmate from this position. It would seem vitally important. We've got 1, 2, 3 attacking pieces which we need here, and it's a beautiful finish. So simple, it seems, when you see it. Well, kind of. I mean, I thought it was very elegant. What would you play here with white, and why, if I gave you 20 seconds starting from now? Actually, I think there's more than one way to win this. I was just having a look at this. No. Okay, I'm just wondering. This is amazing, really. No, I do find it amazing, the simplicity of this. How with these three pieces, the decisive position can be obtained. So have you had some thoughts about this? You see, if we go all in with the attack, I think black just plays f5. That gives also the f6 square for the knight. So knight takes, I think, black now has things under control. Well, with knight f6, that's not too much fun. So white actually played a really sneaky move, check. It forces the king into the corner. So a slight alteration of position. The king's on h8 now. And you might think, well, what was the point of that? And there's a beautiful point here. A very, very beautiful point. Which actually prevents this f5 resource as well. Shuts down that defensive idea completely. And it's to do with h7. So what would you play here if I gave you 20 seconds starting from now? Okay, now on playtest Gaga 1204, naughty Gaga. I've just said queen h5. I think f5 defends this. I don't think we can break it down like this, but in fact there's a move which is a forcing move which makes use of the queen's position rather coincidentally. So knight f5 is attacking the queen, and it's also forking g7, threatening mate in one with queen g7. And you might think, well, rook g8. Well, actually on rook g8 we can just take on g8 and then take on d6. Rook, thanks very much, we can win like that at minimum. So knight f5 is basically forcing e takes. And then after queen takes f6, f5, we're just mating on h7 here. Fascinating finish. That a 2600 was done over by someone nearly 300 points lower from this position where h7 is a slight concern. It's more than a concern, it's just it's a lost position. So this check and this knight f5. Okay, so let's have a look at now another game from Connecticut. I think I've pronounced that wrong, sorry. The Foxwoods Open, 7th Foxwoods Open in 2005. Lenderman against Tim Mirabel. So I think Lenderman's on the GM player, but playing with white. So he's playing this Smith-Morra. So bishop c4, e6, knight f3, a6. After castles, bishop e7, queen e2, knight f6, rook d1. It looks as though e5 is the threat, so knight bd7, putting a brakes on e5. Here, e5 is played anyway. D takes, knight takes. Pardon me. Let's go back. Knight f6, rook d1. We had this position. D takes, knight takes. Black castled. And in this position, this looks a little bit speculative. I'm not entirely... I mean, I wouldn't have been entirely convinced by it. It looks speculative, as though you use it definitely in a blitz game. Knight takes f7 was played. So usually it's not a good idea to give up knight and bishop for rook. The king doesn't want to come out to play, so rook takes f7. Bishop takes e6. Okay, queen f8. Now rook e1. And it's a bit of a miserable position for black. I'm not entirely sure this is totally as thematic as other games for the Smith-Morra, or rather the Sicilian attacks in general. It's unpleasant for black. After bishop b4, bishop g5, h6, the bishop drops back. Bishop takes c3, b takes, knight c5. Now white wins a bit more material winning that exchange, but it's 2 pieces for the rook. He takes on f6. The interesting thing here for me is, you know, the c8 bishop actually. Forget about the king. The c8 bishop. This sector over here. Queen takes f6. We have check. And now, you know, if queen f7, we've got rook e8 check. So we see knight e6. Rook ad1 now is played, and that bishop hasn't got anywhere to go at the moment. King h7. Rook d6. Queen f5. There's some back row tricks sneaked in. If white wants to take on e6 here, takes. If rook takes, we've got queen f1, but it's not desirable because black's doing absolutely fine there, I think, in that rook and pawn ending. So white actually plays h4. He's really wanting to target c8 here. Knight f8, and now rook e8. So nasty pin now. b5. Queen d3, not minding the queens coming off, because this pressure is huge. Queen takes, rook takes. Knight e6. And just rook d6 now. Oh, blimey, sorry. Knight e6. Rook d6 threatens rook takes e6 now because of that pin. King g6, and then now rook d takes e6. So black actually just resigned here, a bit fed up with this game defending, didn't get his queen side out, and it was terribly punished. I'm not entirely sure that's that thematic of the Smith-Morra, more breaking down the Sicilian defence in general. But okay, white had that aggressive position where, you know, sometimes giving up the 2 pieces for the rook is actually good, even if it's not a blitz game, it seems. I don't think this was a blitz game. Foxwoods Open. So that is pretty dangerous. Knight takes f7 here. I mean, from a normal Sicilian not to have the pawn, it looks as though this c-file pressure is handy for other things in this game. Example. So let's have a look at another game now. So this was in Germany 2005 now. We'll go. Karl Gross against Gunnar Zisching in 2005. e4, c5, have knight f3, knight c6, d4, slightly different move order than usual. c3, d takes, knight takes, e6, bishop c4, a6. Now white varies from the usual thematic plans. He plays a4 as though, okay, he's stopping b5, but is this fitting in to a Smith-Morra philosophy to play a4? Doesn't usually feature in model Smith-Morra games, but let's carry on anyway. d6, castles, knight g e7, knight g5. White, to be fair, is only FIDE 2069. He's not that high rated, but let's see this game anyway. Knight g6, f4. After bishop e7, now white took on f7. So he's trying to rip open this diagonal. King takes f5, knight g e5. But there is a huge beauty to this game coming up. Very, very impressive. So it must be Carl Gross's immortal game, I think. We have queen h5 check. Ah! Pardon me. Oh, keep doing that. Careful the mouse. Pardon me. Let's go back. Sorry. f5, knight g e5, check. King g8. F takes e. Right, here we have the crucial moment. We've got this dreaded pawn on e6. We've got this f file. Black wants to get these pieces out of the way. He wants to do something maybe with his rook. He kicks the queen with g6. And and in this position, I'm hoping this isn't a blunder, actually. Having a second thoughts about this now. Oh dear, I haven't done this, have I? I haven't managed to find a massive blunder game. It's possible. It's possible. Can you guess what white played in this position? Also, I mean, this bishop's hanging potentially. So g6 shielded f7 to be able to take the bishop. I guess that was the idea. So white's play in this position plays what? If I give you 20 seconds starting from now. And I'm guessing you're not going to find it because I'm not sure it's entirely sound, actually. Unfortunately, I'm hoping it might be, and my perceived defense is incorrect. No one's finding it, and probably good because it's probably unsound. Okay. All right, let's have a look at it and try and see if it's sound. White played actually bishop h6. I'm hoping this is sound. Okay. Actually, there might be some hope this is sound. Possibly. I say possibly. Now, if we take the queen, initially I was having a look at rook f8. Now, if black wanted a self-mate, black could play bishop takes f8 here for e7, which is mating. Yeah. It's not even mating actually because it's knight f7. That's not mating at all. So scrub that. But black also has queen takes f8, which renders the whole thing rather pointless. So I suspect the idea was like in the game continuation, which would be rook f7. Sorry, someone's mentioned engine sack. Has someone done an engine check here? Engine sack. Take the queen. I don't think rook f7 is working. Okay, if we try and compose this as a helpmate, then this is mating. I found a way to mate black if black's helping out. It does look as though rook g7 is dangerous, and in this position this looks quite dangerous, but Okay, apparently it's not sound. But anyway, black actually played knight takes c4, so I think taking the queen was actually possible, I'm told. But rook f7 now is played. And again, the queen is not taken. Bishop takes e6, check. King f8, rook takes h7, check. King e8, rook takes h8, check. King d7. And white may have just got away with murder if the whole thing is unsound. And perhaps this wasn't a model game to show you. Let's just, now that we've started it, just show the rest of it. So white eventually, without getting mated, black resigned here. I'm not sure about that game. It's a bit suspect. And onto the last game, which I think is better. Sorry about that. Okay, just one more game. So this is Cameron Shirazi against Christophe Klein in Capelle de Grand Tournament, France, 2006. Okay, so white is 2-3-8-9, so hopefully a bit more sounds than our previous guy with white. So the Smith-Morra, knight takes knight c6, knight f3, d6, bishop c4, a6, castles, knight f6, h3 is played here. Black might be, trying to make use of this pin, so that's avoided. b5, bishop drops back, e6, queen e2, bishop b7, rook d1. As though e5 might be an issue, so queen b8 sidesteps and still puts the brakes on e5 from that. Bishop f4, queen b8, bishop f4. And now knight e5, truly putting the brakes on e5. Knight d4. Eyes e6, but is white really going to take? Well, actually he does. Knight takes e6, so keeping the black king in the centre. F takes, and bishop takes e5, d takes, bishop takes e6. A dangerous position for black. Should black be able to survive this position? Well, he plays bishop c5. We have rook ac1, bishop d4. And white continues now very violently trying to get this check in by dislodging this knight, and to do that this e5 is needed. So we see rook takes d4 after e takes e5, trying to get this knight away from h5. Knight d7, or is it? Now it's a different thing actually. With knight d7, white just snaps that off. King takes, check. King e8, queen takes g7. It's a violent game. Rook f8, e6, threatening mate on d7. Queen d8, defending that, but losing the bishop. That's unfortunate. So queen takes b7 and also threatens e7, forking queen and rook. So after d takes, we have e7. So white's getting his material back and takes on a8, check, king g8, queen takes c3. So after all of that, he's 2 pawns up. Rook d8, a4, and actually black resigns here after a4. If he took, I think queen c4 check might be good. Just to take one of these pawns, maybe a6, and white's just better there. So black resigned in this position. He is 2 pawns down. So okay, I hope there's an interesting set of games in this, which will be uploaded to YouTube if you want to further inspect these games. I think most of them are quite interesting for the types of resources to make use of if you play the gambit as white, and the defensive structures as black. Okay, hope you got something out of it. So comments or questions on YouTube, and see you next week. At the usual time, Tuesday, I expect. I've got no club match. So next Tuesday at the usual time, which is 10 o'clock UK time next Tuesday. Thanks very much.